Hi, it's Dr. Jan with some wise words to work with. And why would you let toxicity and bullying hijack your workplace or hijack your career if you could do something to understand and identify it before you got into it? Screening for workplace bullying, if you're an organization and you're hiring people in, is so important, but it's also important when you're going into a job that you screen for workplace bullying. And we often just ignore the signs and the red flags because we don't think that we can be bullied, and we certainly don't think an organization that we're going into has bully culture. But screening for workplace bullying is very, very important. So, last time we talked about what workplace bullying is and awareness. That's really important too, but that is really only the first step in understanding and finding a way to stop bully culture. So, yes, understanding what it is important. But if you're like me, if you know something, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're screening for it or you're looking for it when you're going into a job interview. But if you're in organizations and in professions, healthcare, education, mental health, okay, and even customer service types jobs, those are super high risk for workplace bullying. So it should be um, on your radar to screen for workplace bullying if you're in those professions or you're interviewing for a job that's under those umbrellas. So it's not just that educators are being bullied, it's that the staff who are working there too are also at risk. So, what is screening for workplace bullying? Well, it is just like screening for other things. It is identifying some of those potential risk factors, or when you're going in for an interview or you're interviewing somebody, you're looking for those red flags that say, hey, bullying here. Okay. So we're going to talk about this in two parts. We're going to talk about it if you're being interviewed, and then we're going to talk about how to screen if you're the one doing the interviewing. Okay. So if you're an individual going into an organization, you have a lot of tools thanks to the internet and that kind of thing that can help you screen for workplace bullying. I highly recommend, I don't care what job you're looking at, is if you go read the reviews on websites about the organization that you're interviewing at. And there are lots of different places that you can go to. Monster.com, Indeed.com, Glassdoor.com, just to name a few. What I recommend that you do is you read through the entire list, or at least a large majority of them, and you pick out keywords. So let's just say that you're interviewing at agency A, and there are several reviews that talk about toxicity with management. Okay, that's a red flag. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's bullying there, but if there's a consistent pattern and keywords that people are using, like toxicity, mistreatment, inequality, unfair following of policies and procedures, conflict, those sorts of things are red flags that there might be a problem. And then look at the number of how many people have said those things. So if it's 1 out of 1,000, you can probably ignore it. But if there are more, it seems consistent, then that is something that you want to consider as a red flag, right? Maybe a problem in this column. And you definitely want to ask about those areas or those key words that were in the reviews. So, for example, if one of the complaints is that management mistreats their workers, then what you want to do is construct a question in a way that gets to the root of that issue. The other thing I really recommend is going to the community that you're interviewing and go into that community and ask questions about the organization. How do they get along? What's their reputation like? How do leaders treat workers? And all of those questions that you need to know that might indicate toxicity and bullying. And People will tell you, especially if you're doing it randomly and chit-chatting. So for example, if you're going into a community and you go to the coffee shop will know the reputation. So as you're ordering coffee, ask point blank questions about that agency. There are always signs, and the community members know about it. So utilize those components and those people to understand the organization you might be hired into. The other thing you want to do is open your eyes and your ears and really pay attention to what's happening. So bullying is always around, and if you know what to look for, you can see it even before you get hired. So if they're asking you inappropriate questions or even illegal question, of course that's a massive red flag for toxicity and bullying. Healthy organizations and people in those organizations don't do that, or not nearly as often as bullying does. It's a red flag because bullies and bystanders in bully culture think that they don't have to follow the rules and no one's going to hold them accountable. Pay attention to how people interact and get along. Okay, is there tension or authenticity? You can tell the difference. If you have people in your interview who are talking about other colleagues under the idea that they're doing you a favor by letting you know what's wrong with the other people in the organization, that's a huge red flag. If people are telling you that there's toxicity and bullying, don't ignore that, because a lot of times when those things are happening in an organization, those things come out in one way or another about that person who's toxic or the target. Either way, whoever's doing the talking, if somebody in that interview is talking about and gossiping and about their colleagues, that's a huge red flag for toxicity and very likely bully culture. How do the offices look? Are people's doors open? Is there a reciprocity amongst how people are interacting and getting along? Or does there seem to be like this umbrella of toxicity and negativity? Okay. If people are receptive to one another, saying hello, asking about how things are, those sorts of things, that's a good sign. If those things are absent, it's not a good sign. If people are pleasant to you, okay, not just one person, you have to pay attention to how everybody is, okay? Because sometimes you have that one person who's negative. Everybody else is friendly because they're trying to cover for that person. So if you have one person who doesn't smile, who's shrugging their shoulders, who is looking gruff and kind of crabby all the time, that's a sign. Okay, not in and of itself, but when you put all these other pieces together, it can mean that there's something off. Okay, the other thing I recommend that you do is you develop your own questions to screen for workplace bullying. So you can develop an entire list and utilize that to screen for bullying. So, for example, what are the top 3 reasons the last 5 people left your organization? If people are hesitant to talk about that, that's a red flag. Here's one of the questions I asked recently because I interviewed for a position. To me, was a massive red flag that the organizational culture was off. I specifically asked about the organizational culture. I sort of made a joke and said, this is my area of expertise, so you know I was going to ask. And the dean of that school didn't respond and kicked it over to her employees. That's a sign. If you can't answer it and you're the boss, to me, that says something isn't right. And they kind of hemmed and hawed. So if people are hesitant, that's a sign something might be off. Okay, I'll put some questions below, excuse me, that you can ask. You want to ask about conflict resolution. Ask if they have a bullying policy. Have they had bullying before? Now, you may not want to ask those as directly as that, but you can ask those in a way that will not be as quite as direct as I just put it, but I'll put a list of questions that you want to ask, and then you can make a collective decision. It's much better, I promise you, that you know that workplace bullying exists or it could exist before you take a job, because you can plan for that. You can develop strategies and learn how to mitigate the situation even before you get into it. And if you're interested in that, just let me know. But it's much better to be aware of the culture that you might be getting into before. It's much more problematic and difficult if you're not sure that you're getting into bully culture. So you definitely want to use the tools that you can to screen for workplace bullying. So now what if you're interviewing? Trust me again, you can screen for bullies. And you should. It should be part of your screening and your interviewing process to screen for toxic and bully people. Okay. You may not, it may not be 100%. Somebody might get through, but the more you screen, the more likely you're going to identify people that are not going to be a good fit for you and your organization. What I recommend is that you develop a list of professional skills that you need for your job. And then you have a questionnaire about that, right? So conflict resolution, how do you communicate, etc. You can do a checklist and rate it from 1 to 5. That's great, but that's not enough. What I really recommend is developing a list of questions about how people interact. What if you had this happen? What if you were in a meeting, you had people sitting around, and somebody started to yell and swear at a colleague? What would you do? Okay. And of course, most people will say what they want you to hear. Okay. But parse out those questions and ask follow-up questions so that you can get to the root of how they really do things and not what you want to hear. Okay. You can do case examples. There are some great case examples for you to screen for workplace bullying. Okay. You should ask how people resolve conflict. You should ask people what makes them uncomfortable when it comes to conflict. I'll also put a list for people who are doing interviews, HR, supervisors, etc., of questions that really get to how a person interacts. Use scenario-based questions and open-ended questions. Another good idea is have multiple interviews with multiple interviewers, because you might not pick up on everything. But having multiple interviewers allows for you to check consistency in the answers that they're given. Please check references. I know there is a hesitancy to not check references, but it's really important to check references. How people say things about their worker that they're given a reference makes a huge difference. The other thing is ask them about policy. When is it appropriate to utilize policy? What policies have they utilized in the past? The other thing that's really important is you want to check for these skills. Do people have empathy? Those open-ended questions and those case examples that you're going to use can really help you screen for somebody's ability to be empathetic or lack thereof. You want to screen for communication skills. You want to screen for conflict resolution skills. Utilize those components like questionnaires, professional behavior assessments, checking references, asking the same question in a different way to see how people are responding, and always watch what people are saying and then how their nonverbal and their body language is. You can tell a lot more about what the person is saying by their body language than the words coming out of their mouth. So there are a lot of ways that you can screen for workplace bullies. And why wouldn't you do that when you know that bullying and people coming into your organization can really make a huge difference? So awareness and understanding workplace bullying and what it is really important, but also being aware that it could in fact happen to you, especially if you're in those high risk professions: nursing, healthcare, education, mental health, and customer service. Okay, you're at risk for workplace bullying. And when you know what to look for, you can avoid those organizational cultures that might be toxic. And even if you can't avoid them, you can plan ahead and develop a plan to mitigate the circumstances of workplace bullying so that you reduce the traumatic effects from it. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you. If you have any comments, of course, you can drop those in the comments below, or you can always email me at jan@stopbullyculture.com. I'll also put some screening questions down below for you, and I hope to see you next time. Please like and subscribe and share this with anybody who might be getting into a new job, and help them screen for workplace bullying.